We talk about the beer that you love to be drinking. So many topics to choose from. We're sure to keep you thinking.
Well, welcome to the Green City Hop Breeders panel discussion. This is our chance to get behind the scenes with some of the folks that make our IPA dreams come true and are working hard to make the future even more exciting for IPA lovers. I'm your moderator, Sam Richardson, co-founder and brewmaster at Other Half Brewing Company in Brooklyn, New York. And with me are some of my heroes in the industry. The people that obviously create all the exciting hop flavors that we get to play with. First off, David Dunbar, who's the managing director of Freestyle Hops in Nelson, New Zealand. Jason Peralt, the head hop breeder at Yakima Chief Ranches and fourth generation hop farmer at Peralt Farms in Toppenish, Washington. And last, John Henning, USDA research geneticist. John is currently working out of OSU in Corvallis. What do you find the most entertaining, the best part of being a hop farmer or hop breeder? Like what are you trying to get out of it?
I'm happy to jump in there. I think the thing that I find so exciting and interesting about it is that it's a space where, this is a beverage that's been around for literally thousands of years, and we're still every day finding actually meaningful, interesting new things. Exciting stuff is happening. I mean, there's sort of not many spaces like that you can kind of think of. And I think that to me is just what's so exciting about it, is there's just continually interesting, fascinating new things being found and innovation and, in a space that it's thousands of years old. It should be pretty stale and boring by now, but no, not the case.
True. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd have to answer similar to Dave, there's certain aspects I love of the job, and there's different layers to that. But, farming itself, of course, has that attraction of being cyclical and something new every year. And I love that. I don't think I could go into something that was just the same all the time. I love the fact that there's always a new challenge. We've been doing this for 4 generations, and we're still learning, how to grow hops. And then to play off of kind of what Dave was saying here, then we have this product that we're still learning about the hop itself and what it can do in beer, and really, in my opinion, just scratching the surface and what it can do in terms of flavor profile or functionality within beer. So that's exceptionally exciting. And then of course now, in particular in the last decade, it's the people getting to work within the brewing industry, craft beer in particular, and just seeing the shift that's changed, over the last few years. John's been this in a long time as well. He's seen that same shift, I'm sure, but it's just a different type of industry than it was, decade, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jason, I totally agree with you, Jason, about that. It's just a totally different industry environment, and the excitement that comes from the craft brewers is so rewarding just to be around. And then, that excitement is also seen by the growers because they're excited, they're getting good sales, and they're able to try out different hops, and they're not stuck with the same hops year in and year out. The other benefit that I get from all of it is just the work in the genomics that I'm able to do. Sequencing and assembling the genome and identifying genes that are associated with traits. There's so little information available out there that just every discovery we make is a new discovery. So it's not like you're working in corn or soybean or something where you've got this little tiny niche area that you're working on. It's a wide open field. So from the standpoint of a geneticist, it's very exciting too.
Yeah, I mean, for brewers, I find it's very exciting because we can see the possibilities. We can see how little's been actually done so far, and it just seems like there's been a lack of science behind a lot of it, not complete lack of science, but there hasn't been this deep dive that I feel like is starting to happen right now that's going to be really beneficial, I think, to all of us beer drinkers, producers, growers. So I think that's pretty exciting. And that was basic. I was going to ask you guys what's changed in the last couple of decades, but I think that's probably the biggest thing that's changed, and you guys already kind of brought that up. But I guess my next question would be is how have breeding efforts changed in light of the ongoing shift in styles and usage and how brewers are using hops? What's that look like from the breeder side?
Well, John, I think brings up a great point that, we're working on a minor crop. And so when you have something that's very specific like that, you don't have that support network of other research institutions doing this work. And so I don't know, there's probably less than a dozen research centers around the globe that are working on this. And so what we've really seen is a shift to certainly focus, I think, more on, I guess it starts with just focus on new flavors and aromas that were traditionally not considered beneficial or favorable. I mean, a lot of the aroma hops we're smelling today, 25 years ago, were discarded because they were too pungent, too fruity, too, whatever it may be. And so to me, I think the most dramatic shift has been that shift to now all those things that were being thrown away years ago, or now that's the exciting stuff. Everybody's looking for that. And then, of course, that evolving into the understanding of why those are exciting. What's driving those flavors and aromatics, and how do we exploit that even more?
If I could just add to that, I totally agree with Jason on that. It seemed to be in years past, it was trying to find a hop that would replace a different hop. And that was the sole focus for so many decades, and before me even. And now, like Jason said, it's these things that were getting thrown out. I don't know, Jason and I probably have, thousands of crosses that we've thrown out over the years.
Oh yeah.
Probably would have been great, but they just weren't appropriate at that time.
You always wonder, what could have been.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that I talk about when I get the chance to talk about hops with people is that don't know what's going on in Yakima, which I would have never known either until I was going there regularly, is also how much effort you guys are putting in to figure out varieties that have different pick windows than each other that are interesting, because that's always a roadblock too. You don't want to have too many varieties everybody wants that need to be picked all at the same time. So can you guys maybe explain that, and how you guys go about trying to figure out how to is it possible to pre-select hops based on genetics? Can you tell? Is there any way to see these things ahead of time, or is it just chance?
I mean, I think on the genetics piece, that's not well understood at this point, but that's sort of the dream, right, of having assembled genomes and being able to move towards hopefully having molecular markers that would identify these things. But we're a ways off on that one. I mean, I think early on in the breeding process, you can generally tell pretty quickly, hey, this is early maturing, this is late maturing. I think it's that middle of the season that can be quite challenging because, at least for things that we grow, we're still learning, I think, the optimal picking window, and we've got varietals like Motueka, which you mentioned earlier, which can be significantly different depending on when they're picked. And so, if part of that picking window is loved, but it's also full of 8 other varieties, that's a bit of a problem because we only have so much throughput on the machinery. So I think, at the end of the day, that's really the game, is that none of us can afford to have limitless throughput in terms of what we can harvest. So we all have to kind of pick and choose in terms of what's actually grown.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Dave's right. It's very genetically, it's very complex because you're talking about a physiological response to day length and the plant's ability to allocate carbohydrates to the root system to truly go dormant or have something for dormancy. And so, particularly the day length issue, it creates a challenge in that most of the hops we're selecting are going to mature within a certain window. Many other crops are dependent upon heat units, how many growing degree days they have before they'll flower and then fruit. And so you can breed blueberries, for example, and start picking them in, beginning of June and not finish, and have varieties that'll go clear through and almost into fall. Apples are the other fruits are kind of similar. Hops are different in that you have that day length limitation, and it's not across the board. It's just one of the hurdles you have to overcome. Not to say it can't be, but that is, something that we deal with. And so it's trying to find those varieties. And then as a result of our selection over years and the germplasm we're working with in the area we're in, you kind of find it's a bell curve, and that you stack up a ton of your selections right in the middle of that bell curve. And so that's why, you look at Citra, Mosaic, Cascade, all these varieties are right there smack in the middle of September. And you can only, like Dave said, you can only put so much through your machine. So as a breeder, what we really want to target is the long tails of that bell curve, trying to find those that are on the early side. And if you think about it from a financial perspective, how big of a boon that is for a grower, if we could extend the harvest window out by 2 weeks without them having to add any equipment at all. And then it's better for quality in the middle windows because you can pick everything on time and so on. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think John could probably speak more to the underlying genetic mechanisms, the physiology behind it. That's the challenge we're dealing with.
Yeah, Dave and Jason are totally correct on it. I would love to be able to say that I can select an early male and an early female and make that cross and come up with an early offspring, but that hasn't been the case. And probably my earliest line that is actually showing promise as an early line for breeding purposes and for elite status, a line called 008. That one is a cross with Nugget, which is harvested right in the middle of the harvest season. So it doesn't necessarily follow true that what we're doing. So there's a lot of genetics that need to be done to be able to get a better understanding of that.
Yeah. So before I ask this next question, I'm going to have a sip off of this Rawaka IPA.
Thank you.
And my next question is aroma and flavor versus agronomics. How do you as breeders decide when it's okay for a hop to exist, even if the agronomics are iffy? Like what's the threshold? As I have some more Rawaka IPA.
Well, from a commercial standpoint, I think agronomics almost always have to come first, right? Because you got to create that basic economic value, at the farm level. But at the same time, I think every breeder you probably talk to probably approaches it differently. But at the same time, if you come across something that's exceptionally unique and truly novel, then you certainly aren't going to throw it away, or at least you shouldn't, in my opinion. You should hold on to it, and that becomes part of your germplasm or your breeding stock, so to speak, and you can utilize that to try to advance your population in that direction and improve the agronomics of it, or at least begin to try to understand what's driving it. It doesn't always work. It's not that easy. It's not, but at the same time, that's kind of the idea. You got to hit a certain agronomic bar. What that bar is kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish with that variety, whether it's a replacement for another variety or whether it's something truly novel. There's differences there, but certainly you got to hit at least some minimum agronomic bar first.
So Jason, would you agree that something like 2,000 pounds would be sort of a bare minimum then as a new aroma?
Yeah, I think going forward, I believe that's a good bare minimum target. That with that said, Simcoe and Citra are not 10 bale average hops, but at the same time, I think if you're going to be competitive and continue to advance, you got to use that as your that baseline.
And for people listening, we're talking, when you say 2,000, we're talking 2,000 pounds per acre.
Right.
So just so people have an understanding of that.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective that bar has changed a little bit over the last 5-10 years. I think things that were not possible before, like there's a reason there's very little rewaka. It's so low yielding that it up until recently didn't make any sense. It was sort of just a novelty in a sense. I think because beer pricing has gotten to a place that can support higher hop pricing, then some of these marginal varieties I think do actually still make sense for the farmer. But like Jason said, there's just a limit of once you get below a certain point, it just doesn't work.
No, Dave makes a good point. We can go into the economics of hops, but the fact of the matter is we went from, a few years ago to being purely commodity based, and yield was everything. Now we're in a much different market than we were before, to where quality, flavor, aroma, these are the first things we talk about when we have these discussions with brewers. And there's a difference in the pricing strategy between that and like the alpha market of 20 years ago. So, or even the alpha market today, I guess I should say. So yeah, it's definitely a different, it's a little bit different economically for sure. So the bar isn't quite what it was, I'd say.
So, how much do you guys feel like brewers are playing a part in development of new hop varieties at this point? Like how important is brewer feedback?
It's actually completely everything. They're the end user. And so what they want is the driving force behind what's developed and what's becomes an elite line or what doesn't become an elite line. We could have the highest yielding hop in the world. It's completely disease resistant to everything. But if the brewer's not interested in it, it's worthless. So the brewer, from my perspective, is the most important component of this. Well, I should say the grower as well, because the grower has to be able to grow something that's economically viable. But, if brewers want something and they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
What we've already seen.
The one person the one group of people I'm going to throw into the mix there is also our customers, which I would say we get more feedback quickly than we used to. So we're able to give you guys feedback more quickly on varieties as well. So I think they're also an important link in the chain.
Yeah, that feedback loop back all the way to the consumer is absolutely critical. That didn't exist years ago.
Yeah.
So that's pretty important. And, I kind of, to your point, Sam, your customers to you as you are to us. I'm sure you make some beers that you think, I don't know if they're going to like this or not, but I think it's pretty cool and we're going to give it a try. And I think hops are kind of similar. There's hops that we've come out with that I'm looking at going, this is an oddball, or we'll see what it how if it gets any traction, and then it either does or doesn't. So there's sometimes you kind of get lucky and find something that maybe nobody knew they wanted too. So as much as I definitely place a premium value on brewer feedback, I'm not afraid of going out with something that maybe nobody said they wanted yet either. So I think it can work both ways.
I think another thing I don't think people really understand that I want to get into is just how long it takes to bring a new variety to the public. Do you guys want to tell me the length of time it takes to go from a new cross all the way to commercial? And also, my other question around that too is the increase in interest in new varieties driving a faster first cross to commercialization rate? Are we moving faster now? Is that the future?
So I'm going to say that there is a definitive difference between the public program and the private. And if Jason wants to start out with the timeline that they have, I can finish up or I can start, but there is a definitive difference.
I stick with the same timeline I've always kind of quoted, and that's about a decade, just for development. From time we make a cross, the time we say, yeah, this thing's ready to go into commercial size or commercial scale production, it's about 10 years, and we don't deviate a whole lot from that. There is a lot of focus out there on trying to shorten that timeline. But what's interesting is, we've been doing this, for 30 years now. So the pipeline's pretty full, so to speak. And so we have a pretty wide breadth of germplasm. So I don't get in too much of a hurry. I tend to try to stick to that timeline because I think that vetting process is pretty important. So my view on it might be a little contrarian to some, and they're looking for every little efficiency they can squeeze out of the system to shorten up that time period. But I take the approach of, no, it's more about the breadth of the germplasm and what we're bringing forth. And so, yeah, I still stick with it's about a decade-long process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say for us, we're focused on trying to shorten that process, but we don't have the depth of germplasm or the pipeline that Jason has to start out with. So we're playing a little bit of a different game at the moment. So we are a little more focused on trying to shrink that up. And because our joint venture partners in our breeding company are brewers, they're a little more, I think, aggressive in what they feel like would be reasonable to do. So
right. That was what
influences things.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to in the question anyways, is how much pressure brewers are exerting.
Yeah. So I got to respect our partners, and they have a definite view of wanting to see things sooner rather than later.
So from the public perspective, as a USDA breeding program, I do have to sort of respect, or if you will, look at the whole nation of the United States for the breeding program. And while, gosh, I don't know, what is it? 75% of all the hops in the USA are grown in the Yakima Valley, which is a huge portion of that. There are still a number of growers down in Oregon, as well as in Michigan and other parts of the US, that have needs that are different than what the Yakima Valley has. And so for my particular program, downy mildew is an extremely important component. And just by breeding for downy mildew alone, that's going to add at least 2 to 3 years as a minimum to what a private program is going to be utilizing. So typically speaking, a public variety is going to take anywhere from 10 to 15 years, leaning towards the 15 years for release. Interestingly enough, I get sort of an opposite pressure from releasing too early than what the private companies get. I have a lot of growers who would rather see something really vetted and tested and really put out there before it's actually released. So there's a slight difference in that release time frame.
That's amazing. It's just like that, the tension between the brewers that are asking for more and the growers that are saying, I need to make sure this thing is going to work in my fields.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting. So you were just talking about different regions, and I think that's I have a question about how much the local environment, soil, weather, light, how much that affects the types of hops that can be grown in a region and how it affects their profiles. I don't know. I'm sure what's happening in New Zealand is a lot different than what's happening in Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, we know it must have a huge impact. I mean, I guess to me, the most interesting case of this is Cascade. I mean, Cascade is literally grown everywhere. We grow Cascade Chase Price Cascade. I mean, it's literally everywhere. And the variety of flavor and aroma that each individual terroir produces is astounding to me. And I think just because of sort of my hop sensibilities, that the beers that I was drinking, probably a lot of Cascade heavy things brewed by Tommy Arthur back in the day. I have a sort of special place in my heart for that hop. And it's just endlessly fascinating to me, the array of different flavor and aroma that hop produces. And I think if that's the case with Cascade, it must be true across so many other varietals. And I think we're just so early in understanding, if I wanted Cascade with XYZ flavor profile, where should I go to get it? Is that the Willamette Valley? Is that Tasmania? Is that New Zealand? Is that Germany? I think that's such a fertile space for understanding over the next kind of 5-10 years.
Yeah.
I think that's well
Jason,
said.
go ahead. When are we going to see a New Zealand grown Citra? I'm curious how that would play out.
I'm kind of curious about that myself. Maybe if they loosen their restrictions a little bit on me getting plants in there, maybe we could talk.
I was going to say, yeah,
true.
A couple $1 million in 4 or 5 years should do it. It's absurd.
Yeah, I would say the whole terroir question is a very good question. Jason and I and know Dave, we've seen those differences. We've observed them. Interestingly enough, from a historical perspective, there used to be a very strong resistance towards looking into terroir in hops. But I think recently there's been less resistance to that. So we'll see where everything goes.
They're spot on. We don't really understand it that well at the end of the day. There's a couple ongoing studies right now that actually have been just initiated in the last couple of years to look at it more closely. But it honestly might be one of those lifetime research projects that you start and then 25 years later you're still adding to that. Because if you think about it from the standpoint of within a given variety, there's just going to be certain oil compounds that are conserved, your major oil compounds, the things that you traditionally view as driving aromatics. But really what we're finding out more is some of those things that are really down more in those parts per trillion, in terms of compounds within the hop, are driving just as much of that. We just don't fully understand it yet. So I think it's those compounds that are going to be, just little subtle differences there that we haven't even figured out how to analyze for necessarily, or at least not consistently, and let alone from region to region. So
those are
that's just an example. There's just a ton to do there.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. Those are the critical compounds that we really need to get a better handle on.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and that synergistic relationship between some of these compounds. So, I think there's been some good research in the wine space that shows that some of these compounds, when present with, for example, with linalool, are perceived very strongly, and in the absence of linalool are not really perceived. And these bits of complexity we're just touching the surface.
Yeah,
exciting. Actually.
It is. It's exciting.
All right, I like where we're at because I'm going to ask about thiols next. I feel like that's the hot topic, right? That's the hot topic.
Yeah.
So how much is everybody really pushing, looking for thiols and their precursors in hops? And also, the first person that responds, you want to explain what thiols are so that people that are watching know? Maybe Dave should go since you're in thiol land. You're in thiol country.
I'm in the home of thiol bombs. So thiols are C6 sulfur-containing compounds, and these compounds, at least the ones that we're chasing, are probably most well known as the intense aromatics that are found in New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So that very interesting, complex, tropical passion fruit minerality that you get from a typical New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. It's sort of reasonably well understood. Losing my phone. Where these compounds are coming from. They're secondary metabolites that are coming from a stress response pathway. But I think what we're just beginning to figure out is how much they impact the perception of flavor and aroma in finished beer. And I think we're just very early days. We're building on some good research that the wine industry has done over the last 15, 20 years. But it's not entirely the same set of compounds that we're chasing. Some of them are the same. And to add another further layer of complexity to this, some of those compounds are present in hops. Others of those compounds are produced as a result of yeast metabolism. And it also looks like now possibly there is some sort of just even in the absence of yeast metabolism, some enzymatic breakdown that occurs that produces these compounds as well. So, and of course, they are perceived in sort of different ways depending on the other compounds that are present. So there's compounds that act synergistically to boost their perception or to reduce their perception. And on the fun side for us, they're really hard to detect. They're parts per billion, parts per trillion stuff. And the equipment and processes needed to measure them are not the cheapest or most straightforward to get great sort of specific answers. So hopefully that kind of answered it.
Don't you have to send samples to France to get this tested?
Yeah, I mean, the guys in France at Nicios are probably I think the kind of the leaders in the space, the most accurate. There are a lot of labs that can test for these compounds, but accuracy and repeatability is the big issue for us.
So, John and Jason, are thiols really, is that making waves in the US? Is that exist as a...
I'll defer to John to really answer this because I know he's working on a project right now with this very thing in mind. But it's something that we're paying very close attention to. We've actually built up the analytical capabilities to begin looking at this. And that's the big first step, as Dave alluded to, is just trying to get all that figured out and have something that you can rely on for that. That's been the challenge, but certainly now the next step is to assess your genetic base as a breeder and see what's out there. And then John taking the next step to then start comparing that on a genomic level. So,
yeah, Jason, Yakima Chief and I are into some discussions about pursuing some joint projects on this, but I've done some of my breeding has been focused on thiols in some of the different experimental hop lines that I'm looking at, but that's just within the last couple of years. It's certainly not something that I've been doing for a long period of time. But like Jason and Dave, I'm pretty darn excited about what we can come up with all of this sort of work. It's going to be fascinating just to see, and just hearing Dave talk about it. Combination of these compound thiols with linalool, and I didn't even dream of that, but that sounds like a fascinating component, how all of that's going to work together.
So at this point, are we able to approach hop breeding from the thought of how it plays into biotransformation, like how the different compounds and hops play into that? Is that something you guys can look at? Is that possible? Or are we not there yet?
I'd say we're halfway there would be my take. So probably the obvious example to me is a compound called 3MH. We know that 3MH has a very nice aroma itself, but it can be converted through yeast metabolism to a compound called 3MHA, which is much more potent and is not naturally there in the hop, sort of green hop in the field. And so, we can measure 3MH to a certain extent. We know that more of it going into beer, going into that sort of active fermentation results in more 3MHA coming out. But we also know from a bit of research in the wine space that it's not entirely a linear relationship, and there is a strong influence in terms of the yeast genetics and the yeast strains that are used. And unfortunately, we can't, in the brewing space, we can't just grab one of these yeasts out of the wine world like Vin 7 that we know is going to just throw off massive amounts of 3MHA. It's going to make a phenolic and terrible ale.
Right.
So, we have to sort of, I think, kind of do this now ground up bit of work in the beer space of, okay, what yeast strains are going to be, most beneficial for this, and start to build out the knowledge of really what's that driver of conversion. And then on a wide array of other interesting compounds, we literally have, very, very little, next to no knowledge, other than that we know, hey, when they're there, the perception of aroma is awesome. But outside of that, there's sort of very, very limited knowledge.
That's a good point, because we anecdotally, we know that many of these compounds are, have some basis in genetics. So obviously they have a basis in the environmental and the interaction between the two as well. But if we know that there's a genetic component, then presumably you can breed for it. But we can only be as good as the underlying knowledge of the brew chemistry that goes into that. And so, until we know what we're breeding for, and why we're doing it, there just needs to be, to Dave's point, more knowledge built up so we can understand that. So then we can go in and select for it. And all of a sudden you're selecting for a whole new set of compounds or, genetic combinations, I guess if we put it that way, So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. You have to have brewing partners with pretty advanced lab setups for that, to help with that knowledge. So is that, how close are we getting to being able to sequencing a genome and understanding what some of these flavor aroma compounds are coming from and how they all interact? Are we getting closer to that?
I'm going to say no. And the rationale for that is it's pretty complex, because are we talking about the actual enzyme, the expression of the enzyme? Are we talking about a promoter? Are we talking about a repressor? And we have no idea at this point for the thiols. We know what the directly upstream gene is, but whether or not that's the most important for increasing the levels of a certain thiol is we just don't know that yet. So there's a number of studies that need to be done where we can actually look and see what are the important regions of the genome that are involved in the expression of this particular trait. So, I'm not saying we're far, far away from it, but there's several studies that need to happen before we're at that point.
Yeah, and I'd say the other one is, hops are just massively heterozygous, and even until recently, they have massive repetitive portions of their genome. So just the assembly of cascade was particularly challenging, and until the recent availability of cheap ultra long read sequencing, even that was a very, very tough ask.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We have the cascade. We do have it assembled into the 10 pseudochromosomes now, and we're annotating that. So it's near to the point where we're going to get a much better understanding of where things are in terms of the genome, but it's still a long ways off.
Well, that's exciting. There's still lots of work to be done. It won't be boring for you guys.
Job security.
Yep.
That's right, job security.
Yep. Definitely.
All right, let's go away from the science. Let's go away from the science a little bit again. For those of you that have already released a variety, what's a variety that you've released that you love, but hasn't really taken off in a big way, and why? I think these kinds of questions are important because I think I think people don't think about all the steps that have to go into getting a hop to market, from the timing, from, how well it grows, how it's received, and how it's marketed, because that's also an important thing. And I just wonder, like, what's this hop? What's the hop that for you was like, this is the hop, and then you're like, psh, nobody wants it. Does that exist?
Yeah.
Yeah, those exist. We out of our program, I think one that I've always been pretty fond of, but it's difficult to get a handle on the best way to use it, is Equinaut. So that's one example. I think that's a great hop, can do some incredible things in beer. A lot of people, I think, have tried to use it as a standalone, and I think it works better in conjunction with other hops. And I think once you figure that out, it does some really great things in beer. But I think another good example is a variety that actually Gene Probasco had released, and that was Laurel. I would love to see Laurel take off more. I think that is just an incredible hop that has this big floral aroma, driven by its oil profile, that just, I think, makes a really great beer. And so, yeah, I could probably give 2 or 3 more examples, but that's those 2 for sure. Autanum's another one I'd love to see take off again. So I'll shut up. Sorry.
I know. I will agree with you on Equinaut. I feel like that's a misunderstood hop. That's one I really enjoy. But it's just, yeah. If it's alone, it gets too much of that bell pepper.
Yeah.
People struggle with.
Yeah. But yeah, I've seen it used in ways that just bring out this really pleasant orange juice. Really, I don't know, a real supporting role of it. Just a real balancing act. But yeah.
So I think for me, and this is more of a recent one, is Triumph. I mean, it's a new release, so who knows where it's going to go. But another variety that it just took a long time to really pick up is Mount Rainier. And Anheuser-Busch is now using quite a bit of that, or they're ramping it up. It's an incredibly nice hop, but it's one of those that it was released and it just sat there for years and years and never went anywhere. And I've got to step away. I have a new German short-haired pointer puppy that's causing some problems.
Oh, geez.
Brief moment here. So I'll be right back.
No problem.
Yeah. That's like purchasing an angry toddler on purpose.
Yeah. All right. My next question is, where do you guys see the hop industry in 5 to 10 years from your perspective? What's going to happen?
Ooh, I mean, I kind of think the current focus on flavor and aroma is not gonna change, but I see a much more intense focus on perfecting some of the existing varietals. And I think by perfecting, I mean being able to deliver the flavor and aroma that a varietal is capable of and that a brewery is asking for. I think in in many ways, kind of in the same way that a grape grower can do that. They know, hey, look, I'm in Northern California, I'm growing cab, I'm gonna, pick it at this point to deliver this flavor aroma profile for this winery. And I think that's the direction that we're headed in. And I think, we've started down that path, and I think the sort of growth in terms of our knowledge and ability to do so is just going to accelerate from now on.
Yeah,
Love it.
I agree. I think that we'll see that continued focus on flavor and aroma and actual, kind of improved functionality of hops, and that's going to drive everything then, because that's also going to drive breeding and selecting for compounds, and it's going to drive, as Dave said, our agronomic practices, our growing practices, to try to make sure we're maximizing that impact in whatever targeted way we're looking at. But so I do think that flavor and aroma is going to be the driver of everything. And as we understand it better, that's what's going to determine our goals and what we do.
Awesome. All right, my last question, because I'm always fascinated by this, since I've gotten the opportunity to rub experimentals a lot of different times at this point. What's the wackiest aroma and flavor profile you've ever experienced in a hop? And I'm gonna start, and you guys may not think this is wacky because there's probably things that you guys experience that are crazier than what I've seen, because I don't get to see as many. But I rubbed a hop one time that I would describe as tire fire and soy sauce. So to me, I actually really cherish those experiences, because then I realize when I do get amazing hops in front of me, like the wide, the huge difference in varieties. But I'd love to hear what you guys have experienced.
I'm pretty sure Jason and Dave and I would never let you smell some of the hops that we've developed. But I could say the gamut can run anywhere from you rub and sniff and just like absolute, I'm gonna vomit, to my wildest hop that I've ever actually smelled like chocolate. It had a huge chocolate aroma. Unfortunately, that didn't stay through once you did the kilning, so it never really went anywhere. But yeah, when you had a fresh hop, it literally smelled like chocolate.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's weird. Some of the aromas you'll get. I've had, I had one that, like John said, it was chocolate early on, and that evolved into like this weird earthy mushroom aroma, like really strong, unmistakable. Yeah. It wasn't like, oh, I kind of smell that. It was unmistakable. But then there again, though, it doesn't necessarily translate into beer. So how much functionality does that actually have? But one that always pops in my head when I get questions like this is, you might be familiar with it, as HBC 472. Just because of that woody character it can impart in a beer, and I think it most often gets used in stouts and similar styles, to where it plays so well, but it's masked by the style itself. But if you were to use it in something like an IPA, you actually do get this very big wood, almost barrel character with some whiskey notes, and so that's pretty cool, because that actually translates from the hop into the beer, and you don't get that. And that's the important
part.
Yeah.
That's the important part, is if it can translate into a beer.
Yeah. It's fascinating once you get a flavor like that.
Yeah, I'd say for me that the most unusual, it wasn't in a bad way. I rubbed one that was just straight watermelon Jolly Rancher and nothing else. There was it was just bizarre, and it didn't come through into the finished beer. It just basically was like adding nothing to the beer. So I don't know. Yeah, it was just one of these strange ones of like, when you rubbed it, it was, there's no other hoppy character to it. It was just the singular. And then it was nothing in finished beer. It was like,
Like, I just really wanted that Jolly Rancher character.
Yeah, your hopes were dashed.
Yeah. We thought, wow, this is amazing. It's so strange, but no, it just disappeared.
Awesome. Well, you guys, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking hops with me. It's very fascinating for me, and I think for everybody else. So, I really can't thank you guys enough for taking the time.
Thanks for having
Thank you. That was fun.
Yeah, this was
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
Always enjoy
Yeah,
talking hops.
Yeah.
Me too. Normally, I spend a lot of time doing it with brewers, so it's kind of nice to do it with farmers and breeders. It's always like another level, where it's a different time now. Like the amount of conversations I have with brewers about a lot of these same topics is kind of insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, anyways, I really do. Again, I do appreciate you guys coming on with me. I'm endlessly fascinated by it. So, hopefully, I get a chance to come see you guys all soon.
Thanks, Sam.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Have a good night or morning.
Dave, John, take
Cheers.
care. Good chatting with you.
Good seeing all you guys.
Yeah.
The other beer, the other beer, the other beer.